Hi everyone, welcome back to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and our guest today is Lama Tomas. Lama is also known as Tom O'Flaherty, and he is a Buddhist monk ordained in the Celtic tradition. He lives a life of service, teaching spiritual approaches to addiction and recovery in several rehab and recovery centers in New England. Lama Tomas is also a hospice volunteer, a grief counselor, and a member of the Brattleboro Zen Center here in town. Welcome, Lama Tomas.
Thank you. He sounds impressive. I wish I knew him.
Well, you're going to get to know him in this half hour. That's what the show is all about. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. This is, as my family and friends know, I'm never shy to be in front of the camera. So
it's the O in front of your name that gives that away, right?
It is indeed, yes.
Tomas, you have lived a really interesting life. You are living a very interesting life, and you've done a lot of different things. In fact, I was going to start your intro with you've been a Boy Scout, a businessman, and a Buddhist, and other things as well. I think one thing that's really interesting, and when we'll pick up details, is that you've kind of lived parallel lives in your life. And you mentioned to me that you started being interested in Buddhism at the age of 15, as well as drugs. Yes. So there right away is kind of setting a stage.
Yeah, my Buddhist, whenever I speak down to Buddhist-centered groups, there's always a sense of, rubbing my toes in the sand, gosh, gee. Because I did live both for, from 1961 until 2010. And, but I think that's part of what we do as humans, too. We pick and choose pieces that work, that fit the mosaic of what we want to be or what we think we can get away with.
Yes.
And I did them both. Probably neither well. That was sort of at the end when I came into recovery. It was totally a question about I just wasn't authentic, and I was living this family member, this community member, this Buddhist person, and this dope fiend, and I wasn't playing any of them at full potential. And that's when I decided, I just want to be who I am.
And, I think, when you talk about starting at the age of 15, I started at 17, having questions and seeking some kind of spirituality. And I think for many people, that is also the age when you're experimenting with so many different things, drugs and alcohol and sex and furthering your brain and knowledge and all of that. So, it makes sense that would be true. And I know that you mentioned that you were thinking during those years also of becoming a doctor or a hockey player.
Once again, I didn't do either well. I always wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor from as young as I can ever remember, right up until my start of my junior year in college. It was also the same year that I first did heroin. And so suddenly the idea of spending all that time in medical school and residency and everything else was my way of saying, nah, I think I'll just do this other piece. But yeah, and I still carry it today. I love researching, clinical research, especially around addiction. And just being, I'm always, what's the next step in any physical issue that I have, arthritis or whatever. So it's never left. And anybody that's ever spent any time with me in recovery knows that my classic line is, I'm not a doctor, but I played one on television once, which I actually did.
Did you?
Yeah, in public TV, WGBH Channel 2 in Boston.
Well, that could be just as good, Yeah. You also, at some point, became a businessman, and that was also with medical.
In the midst of all the things I did, it was after being a commercial fisherman and before being unemployed or whatever. I was clinically trained at Mass General Hospital as a clinical perfusionist running a heart-lung machine during cardiac surgery, intra-aortic ballooning, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, and I loved it. I trained with some of the best surgeons in the world, and that parlayed into a business career because one of the distributors that called on me said, have you ever thought about going into business? Because you can charm the leaves off the trees. And I did. In 1979, I left clinical practice and went into sales until 2010 when I retired.
And in between all of this time, too, you got married and had a family as well.
I got married several times, and at the end, I had a family. I got married in 1980 to a wonderful lady, and had 5 children, plus foster children over the course of time. 2 birth children, 3 adopted kids. And yeah, it was just, life seemed to take a stable view at that point, but I was still this, underneath, I was this other person.
Well, when you say other person, you mean that you were using during that time, and so that was sort of a part of your life that you didn't share.
No, the great author Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote 100 Years of Solitude, Love in the Times of Cholera, he said that we all live 3 lives: public life, private life, and a secret life. And that's what it is. We all have that secret life. For some people, it's just, not much, but for other people like me, it was this huge, for 21 years of the relationship, marriage, I was just never honest with my wife, because I never let on that I had this addiction to opioids, and I pulled it off.
You were functioning.
Highly functional.
You were highly functioning. That's amazing with heroin.
Well, that was learned behavior. My father was a wonderful man, loved him, but he was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
But he was highly functional.
Right.
And so I didn't get the alcoholism or the addiction from him. I got the highly functioning way of making it work.
Yeah.
And I did. Never got arrested, never got crashed a car, never did any of that dumpster fire stuff.
Can you talk a little bit about what you feel, and I imagine it's a feeling more than anything else, about authenticity for yourself?
It's accepting who you are. If you can't, then work on what you are so you can be who you are. And that was just, for me, the authenticity was just not hiding anymore. And just to being able to, as anybody that knows me, I'm out there. What you see is what you get. And it's just a very, very clean, sweet way of just being, this is it.
Yes.
And I don't have to worry what I told you the last time. So make sure I'm telling you the same time this time. I don't have to worry about where my stuff is. I don't have to worry about any of that because what comes out is just what is.
Yes, and you know that you've been true to that.
Yeah. I mean, I got there. It took a while. That's part of that. I'm not proud of all of that in my life, but I'm also not ashamed of it because I can't change it. It is what it is, and it can only guide how I live the rest of my life.
You really changed direction and changed your purpose, right?
Yeah, that life took an incredible turn, and I did it. I got clean and sober. Like I said, met some young lady who just said I made a difference in her life, and I decided 2 days later when I was sitting that, if I can have that kind of an impact, an effect on somebody, what kind of an impact can I have on the world around me if I'm clear? If I'm not high all the time. I have to remember I'm on television, so what words I use.
It's public access TV, so you can be pretty open.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just to want to make a difference, and I did.
Yeah.
At that moment, June of 2010, I just said, I want to make a difference. Of course, I immediately left Portsmouth, New Hampshire, moved to Costa Rica so I could surf, and then wound up in Bocas del Toro, Panama, because the surf is better. And, I got to that living that I wanted to be in, giving and making an impact. But it was sort of a nice way to do it. The waves were great and everything.
Yeah.
So.
In Panama, you also were working at a homeless elder center there. Was that part of this time?
Yeah. After I left Costa Rica, I met a dear friend of mine in Panama, and she said, "Why don't you go back to Costa Rica, pack all your stuff up, and move here? You can run the front of the house of my restaurant." So I did, and it was still surfing. And I found this place. It was a homeless elderly center run by the country. And I asked her, I said, I'd really like to be involved, because I just didn't want to party. I just didn't want to surf. I wanted to do something. So I wound up going to Casa de Asilo, the home of sanctuary, and pushed some of the residents in wheelchairs to the little park in the middle of the island. And we called it walk and roll, and it was just great. I went back the next day and did it. The next day I went back. It was raining, so I washed dishes in the kitchen. And then it became 9 years when I was in Panama of doing that 6 days a week.
Lama Tomas, you came to this point in your life when you realized that you wanted to be clean and sober, and that experience of what would it be like if I were more clear. Did you notice a big difference in yourself?
More so than anybody else noticed. Absolutely. It was just, suddenly I could be, after following this tradition of practice of Buddhism from 1961 to 2010, and I went, well, now I can really practice. Now I'm not picking and choosing. Now I'm not saying, I don't see any of the cocaine, meth, heroin, opioids. I don't see any of that of the intoxicant list, so I can do them. It was just wine, and it was a true practice, and that just that centered me. It really allowed me to be true to myself. Anybody who knows me, especially back then, as I said, wouldn't know the difference, because I was still a silly boy on the outside, but I never wanted to lose that. To this day, I don't want to lose that. It's Jim Morrison of the Doors that was asked by Rolling Stone in an interview how he viewed himself, and he said, "I consider myself a sensitive, sincere, rational human being with the soul of a clown, which causes me to blow it at the most important moments." So I sort of want to be that way all along. But still be true, still to be able to say, this is how I got to where I am.
Yes.
And serving other people. True service. I never say I work with so and so. I serve people.
And when you talk about service, did that come out of going through your recovery?
It emerged, when it's sort of like a plant, a flower coming out of the ground or through the pavement. When the outer layer came off of who I had fashioned myself as, and who I truly was coming out, it had only one direction, and that was how to serve, how to take what I had from lived experience, what I had from the vast experiences of everything I ever did, even commercial fishing, I can still use that, and to be able to apply it to just being in service to other people. One of the primary vows that we take is the vow of poverty. So I can't be compensated for anything I do in service. Weddings, funerals, counseling, recovery work, which is why Turning Point Recovery Center in Springfield, when I'm in Bellows Falls, they love me because we can't pay you? No. Are there any more of you out there? Because we're also underfunded. But this is what I do.
Yeah. And when you took a vow of poverty, so that was part of you being ordained in the Celtic Buddhist way.
One of 227 vows.
Really?
We can't do shit. We really can't. I'm not supposed to show my knees. We're not supposed to dance, listen to music, sleep on high beds, wear perfume. I mean, it's 227, but they're 2,500 years old.
Right.
And they're 2,500 years old in a culture that was patriarchal, that was, just a lot of, it was India and Sri Lanka, Nepal, that area, mostly India. So, we're not supposed to do a lot.
And can you retrofit that to your life?
Oh, that's like I said earlier, I pick and choose what works, and I put together a good person. It's, honesty, not taking life, not sexual misconduct. We're celibate, so that eliminates a lot of the potential vow breaking. And it's just, I keep it simple. I know what's right, and I know what's wrong. So I always go to the right.
Yeah.
Not politically, but and morally, just what works.
And going back to when you first were introduced to Buddhism and drugs, could you say that there was a value for, I'm thinking of opening oneself up to a larger picture, to a larger being, to being in service, all of that. Can you say that drugs helped you in that?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I was never a big acid guy in the 60s because I went downtown, I did heroin for the first time in 1967, like I said, my junior year in college. And I like that, sitting around, eating chocolate, listening to jazz, maybe having sex, that kind of just mellow.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I learned so much more now that I don't.
You mentioned that you were a Boy Scout, and then you were almost 65, 70 when you took your vows as a Celtic Buddhist. Somewhere in there.
2014, 13.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering about pledging. Like pledging yourself to someone. It's pretty much the same as taking vows. But what do you feel in you that allows you to pledge?
The values, the understanding what's important, and this was always shuffling my foot in the sand again too, because I had a 21-year relationship and a marriage with an absolutely wonderful human being, mother of my children, our children, and that was the consequence. That was the consequence to my drug use. The only time I ever had a consequence, and I pledged honesty to her. And for 21 years, I wasn't honest. I mean, she knew I got high, but she didn't know that I was doing heroin. She didn't know I was abusing opioids, et cetera. Right. But so the pledge to me, the pledge of service to people is just how I have to live. I mean, if I really believe this practice that I have has value, finally, after I washed all the shit off it, and said, this is the way I want to live.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just, the next person who walks through the door at Turning Point, how can I help you?
You spent quite a bit of time at Riverbank House Recovery, which is in New Hampshire. And could you talk a little bit about that? I hadn't heard of that organization.
The bank. I first got involved with Riverbank House Recovery Center in Laconia, New Hampshire, back in 2015, when I was living at the Buddhist Center in Saxons River. And my primary student was teaching there. He was doing a Buddhist course because it was based on Buddhism and 12 steps. And he said to Randy, the owner, the founder of it, you should get my teacher over here. So I met Randy, who I knew, sort of. And I just started going over there one day a week. Then in 2018, right after my oldest son died from an overdose, I moved in as resident guiding teacher. There were 9 homes, 5 businesses, including a restaurant called Karma Cafe. Yeah, interesting. And 45 guys on campus paying an average of $12,000 to $14,000 a month. Wow. Out of pocket. The business model changed. And it went from $14,000 a month to Medicaid, 28 days,
Yes.
not long
Proscribed.
term. Yeah.
Yes, right.
So
Yeah,
they
that-
wound up selling houses and businesses. And
Yeah. Oh, so it doesn't exist as it did.
the house, the Riverbank house still exists, but it's back to being a rooming house, which it was before Randy bought it and started building it.
Oh.
And it was the same with the retreat that we started up in Dalton, New Hampshire, Legacy Recovery Retreat. And we were open for a year, and I lived in residence there. And it was just, that was $5,000 a month and out of pocket, and people just couldn't afford it.
Locally, you've been working with hospice and grief counseling.
When I first came here, when I was living at the Buddhist Center, did their hospice care coursework, grief coursework. Because grief has always been a place in my life. I grew up in a funeral home. So my earliest memories as a child at 5 are, people crying and wearing black and kids playing with my toys in the playroom. And so mortality's always been there.
Yes.
And so this just became something that I realized I could serve people with.
Yeah.
And so then that morphed into this really working on my recovery work.
Well, it is really interesting going back to parallel lives, the things that sort of intermesh with what you've experienced, what you were born into. And you've also had your own lived experiences. You did lose your son.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, my oldest son, Noah, in 2 days before Father's Day in June of 2018, was doing well. I talked to him 5 hours before he died. We made plans to get together for Father's Day when I was in New Hampshire the following Wednesday and have dinner. And on Father's Day morning, I got the call at 8:30 that they had found him, and he had died from an overdose using fentanyl alone.
Well.
And so that just changed. As a matter of fact, I carry some of his ashes in the Buddha bead on my mala. Not as a reminder, because I think about him a lot all the time. And his death didn't inspire me to do this service. His death showed me, because he was one of 70,750 people to die from an overdose of fentanyl in 2018. But I thought about the 70,750 families that had to go through what my family did. Calling his mother while she was at work. What's going on? Tell me I'm at work. Your son is dead. So that's became what I do. Back up from Ink Dog, put his name on my wrist, so I can't not see him every day.
Yeah.
But I see him every time somebody walks through the door. I see him every time I look in the mirror. Just some of us, recover, and some of us don't.
Yes, right. Yes, Lama Tomas, we haven't talked yet about John Perks and
please.
coming to Celtic Buddhism. Yes, and we just, I don't say we've lost someone anymore, but he has moved on.
He has. The native First Nation people of the United States say he has walked on. He's my beloved. He was my beloved teacher, guru.
Yeah.
I lived with him for 18 months. I met him in 2012. I was able to hold his hand. We were able to hold hands 3 days before he left his body. And he just was a powerful influence.
Is he the originator of Celtic Buddhism, putting those two things together?
He's the person who applied the thoughts of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche from Shambhala, from Barnet, Vermont, Carmichaeling, that Yeshe, that John was his attendant for 7 years, and they went to Ireland. They had all these wild experiences in the thin places, and Trungpa just said, you need to pursue this. So when Yeshe came to Anadare, the Buddhist Center in Saxons River in 1986, this was after he got the money to be able to buy the property and start it from being Bill Cosby's butler for 7 years. So
Right.
But yeah, he put it together, and we continue it today, even in his absence.
Yes, for folks in the audience, we did a show with John Perks about, 5 or 6 years ago, which was really wonderful. It was really fun. He has such a great spirit, and I think that's one thing that that I see your reflection of that as well in the crazy wisdom, right?
Well,
Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's what drew me, and Shungam Rinpoche is an interesting guru to look at. He died of alcoholism. He had relations with his students. I mean, he did all the things you don't expect a great master to do. But his way of teaching was just phenomenal, just impactful. And when I first met Yeshe in June of D-Day in 2012, I was like, wow, Celtic Buddhism. Well, I'm Irish and I'm a Buddhist. Hell, I got to check this out. And it's the wisdom. When you look at many of the Tibetan brilliant wisdom speakers, they were Patrul Rinpoche, the mad monks. They were just people that really get. Because when we all look at it, when wisdom comes, our first approach is like, this is crazy. So we just combine the two. And it's a very ordered practice as far as, the kind of ritual that we follow, etc. But if you look at the lineage holders, if you look at the collection in Celtic Buddhism, we're Zenists, we're Tibetans, we're outlaws, we're, crazy wisdom seekers.
Yeah, and again, it's sort of the parallel lives that are going on, right? And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that in terms of, we think of lamas or priests or ministers as being holy, and at the same time, we're all human beings. And, with all of the trappings that go with that. And so I guess there's this, for me anyway, there's kind of this thing about that kind of focus to know yourself and to be whole in yourself, and also to celebrate being a human being, and also being a human body with all that has to offer and all of the trappings of that and the aches and the pains, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're all seeking the better in somebody. I think we're looking for a teacher or a wisdom speaker that we go, oh, they're better than us. At the same time, we want them to be just like us, because then it's believable.
Right. Yeah.
And I look at Jesus of Nazareth, man, what a dude. Up to the crucifixion, and the Christing part of it is where I separate, just because I look at Jesus of Nazareth, I look at some of the great teachers, and these were just human beings.
Right.
I always say to people, if you don't think over 41 years of teaching after the Buddha's enlightenment, if you don't think of those 41 years, he never sweat or shit, you're missing the point.
Yeah, right.
Because it's very, very human.
Yeah.
And Yeshe was very human.
He was very, very human, yes, yeah. And enjoyed life.
Oh.
That's the other thing about being able to enjoy this life that we are living. Well, Lama Tomas, is there anything that you'd like to say in closing the show, or anything that we missed talking about?
No, I guess that two things I'd say. First of all, to the world, I'm a person in recovery after 47 years of active use, and if I can do it, anybody can. But it's doable. You just have to seek and find a way. My favorite Christian poet, St. John of the Cross, said that there are many paths to the top of the mountain, but from the mountaintop, the view of the moon is the same for all. And 15 years later, in my recovery, I do the same three things in the morning, and I always, whenever I teach, whenever I speak to groups, to anybody, When you look in the mirror in the morning, we all do, guys my age are trying to see if we have to trim the hair in our ears or nose. Promise to be kind to that image you see looking back at you today, because you may be the only one. And secondly, promise to do the best you can, because that's all you can do. I have a good friend who goes, dude, I gave it 110%. I went, you can't. You can only give it 100%. And thirdly, and most important, when you look in the mirror in the morning, realize that you're standing in front of the mirror today, which means you made it through yesterday. So at the very least, it's rinse and repeat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it was great. Great to hear you. Thanks to all of you out in the audience. There's so much to take away from this show, and it's so lovely to be with Lama Tomas and all he's done and all he has to say. And, so we hope to see you again. Tune in. We will be back. And thanks for tuning in today. Excellent.